Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to today's Fireside Chat. My guest today is Sharon Price John, the CEO of the iconic Build-A-Bear Workshop, a Columbia Business School grad who is currently coming to us from a cornfield in Nebraska, as I understand it.
That is true. It's a house in the cornfield, but yeah.
I have to say that's a first. So Sharon's been a long time CEO of Build-A-Bear Workshop, and before that had a number of major roles at major retailers. She has a brand new book coming out called Stories and Heart, which will be out in January of 2023. So it's not out yet, so I don't have a book cover to flash at you, but we can definitely talk about it, and maybe you'll come back when we're ready to talk about the book being published. So welcome.
Thank you so much. It's always a delight to see you, Rita. I'm so glad I could make this work out today.
Me too. So for those that don't know you, maybe give a little bit of your background, because, to go from a tree climbing tom girl in Tennessee to where you are now has been quite a journey.
Yeah, it's been a fun journey. And in fact, writing the book was really enlightening to me to string it all together and try to see where the dots connect. And also cathartic, as I sort of wrote it during an unexpected time. We actually inked the deal with Forbes before COVID. And actually that January of 2020. So it's been a longer journey than expected, but a really good one. And so to answer your question, yeah, I grew up in a smallish town in southern Tennessee, which is not where I am right now. This is my husband's home place. And I think that's part of what drew us together. We're both from these smaller rural communities, and yet went and ended up with some, better known MBA schools and on with business, but we had a lot in common. And so ended up doing that and getting into advertising, moving to New York City, then going to Columbia, as you noted, and getting into the toy industry, and kept just climbing the ladder at Mattel and Hasbro, jumped to the fashion footwear business. And then that was more of a vertical retail experience with Stride Right Children's Group. And that's all of that put together of the toys, some preschool experience with Hasbro on Play School, and the retail really made me what people believe to be a great candidate to take over from Maxine Clark, the founder of Build-A-Bear, back in 2013. So that's, really just the highlights. And as you know, in the book, I sort of warn about this really succinct, bullet pointed, all, upward trajectory comments, but that's the fastest way to get your resume out. But everybody knows it was probably a little more of a circuitous journey than that.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the book, one of the things I love about the book, and I got to read a pre-publication version, which I feel very privileged to have done. But one of the things I love about it is you're very honest about, well, this thing, I thought I was going to do this and it did that, and this other thing didn't work. But one of the things you talk about in the book that I love is this whole concept of what's the worst that could happen. Mm-hmm. And I think when I talk to especially younger people, right, there's a lot of fear, right? There's a lot of, should I ask for that raise? Should I put myself out there? Should I ask for that next job? And I don't think they do enough thinking about, well, what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah, well, there are some really terrible things, but the truth is the odds of that are so small, and we over-amplify the small percentage of likelihood of something really going dramatically wrong. In fact, it's probably not going to. Just like everything in real life, the outside edges of the curve are the unlikely result. Mm-hmm. So just being able to calm yourself in maybe a trepidatious or fearful situation where you're trying to decide whether to maybe ask for a raise or ask for a promotion or anything else, maybe take a chance on a job interview that's outside of your scope. where maybe you don't have all of the qualifications that are there, but maybe you have just enough. You have to say, look, how bad could this be? Maybe you'll learn something. Maybe it's okay if you can come out of it with more information, more self-confidence, and that's really key, than you went in, then it was a great experience. And you have to be very conscious of how you define that experience. That's half the game. So not only is there this finding the sort of approach that says it's okay if this doesn't work out, because that doesn't mean that it didn't work out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then sort of wrapping your own personal story around whatever happened to be empowering versus disempowering, then you just keep moving. Then that kind of fear goes away. You're psychologically reducing the fear factor because the downside is minuscule and the result is irrelevant.
Right. I love that. I love that. So let's dig into Build-A-Bear for a minute, because I think it's such a fascinating business model. I mean, Maxine Clark, brilliant entrepreneur, sort of has this inspiration, which is, I've got it. I'm going to get people to pay me for the free labor that creates my product. Isn't that genius? Right? So starts the company, phenomenal success, featured in business school case studies and everything, but eventually kind of outgrows what it had been. And then they turn to you as someone with more of a corporate footprint, bigger, experience with bigger brands to turn it around. Can you talk about that transition a bit?
Yeah, it's always a very, I'd say, interesting footbridge when you are in a situation where the business has been struggling, and Build-A-Bear was struggling. It had been in contraction from a profitability perspective for about 8 years.
Oh, wow. I didn't know it was that bad.
Oh, yeah. And was in a loss situation in 2012, the last full year before I took the helm. And particularly when you are asked to take over from a dynamic, beloved leader, which Maxine is and still is, and deserves to be so. But there had been difficulty moving the company in what might be considered the right direction, or a profitable direction, or a growth direction post the recession, where a lot of companies had finally, after a lot of rocky road, had finally kind of started going in a more profitable sort of trajectory. But, there were also a lot of companies that didn't make it through the recession. So, Build-A-Bear's still there, but maybe not fully recovered. And so that there's a lot of, I think, graciousness on both sides of the fence on this one. That it's hard for a founder to, in any circumstance, to hand over the helm. And it's hard for someone coming in to find a path to success because sometimes this is what I would say the easiest, maybe even, and I would say unfortunate truth, that is easier to get traction by demonizing the previous administration, if you want to call it that. That creates, change faster. But I was not willing to do that. Well, one, there was no reason to do that. So it was, how do I create the narrative around the necessary change while holding on to what was really important to the company, which was the heart and the culture. Mm-hmm. I would never have gotten the organization to come with me if I'd been a traditional turnaround agent. And I needed for them to believe that I was going to lead them in a direction that could ultimately monetize this extraordinary brand and extraordinary equity that they created in ways that they'd not yet really understood that they could. So it was giving everyone credit for what they had done versus really dissecting all the things that we had done that had gotten us into a situation that was negative. But at the same time, we had to let go of some of the past to do that. Mm-hmm. And that's not always easy. In fact, that's one of the hardest things to do in a company. is to get people to put aside things that aren't working for them anymore, and move forward into the unknown. And we put up I used a mechanism. It's a fairly well known, but I put up a large photoreal of a windshield of a car that has the rearview mirror in it. And when I was trying to get them to understand the necessity for change, and that even though we had to evolve our direction, I wasn't intending on ripping the heart out of the company. And I explained to them that there's been a lot of research about how much time you need to be spending focusing on the future and how much time you need to be focusing on the past. And that's the relative size of a windshield versus the rearview mirror. And if all we do is keep looking in the rearview mirror, what's going to happen to a car? And they yelled out, "You crash." I'm like, well, that's what we're going to do, because the world has changed. We cannot continue to operate exactly the same way that we were operating back in 1997, 8, 9, up to the 2000s, when you experienced so much success. That world no longer exists. The retail footprint has changed. The mall traffic has changed. The digital economy has exploded. The consumer expectation is different. We have to change with that. And here's the great thing. All this time, you've built this extraordinary brand that can move into this new world, but we have to meet the consumers where they are. And that really led us to this opportunity to think about that. What they had done is created this extraordinary retail company, Build-A-Bear Workshop, that almost, I use the term accidentally, but it was probably more purposeful than that, built an extraordinary brand. And what we needed to do was flip the model on its head and say, now we're an extraordinary brand that just happens to have vertical retail as one form of revenue. And that led us to building out our e-commerce business, re-engaging in our international franchising business, rebuilding our entertainment arm, which we now have a movie on Netflix with Honey Girls, which is an intellectual property that we created, building out our licensed business beyond the kids business, and recognizing that because we were now multi-generational, that we could expand the consumer base to a much larger addressable market of 12 and older now, which represents 40% of our business.
I was looking on the site the other day, and there are wedding packages now.
Oh, absolutely.
Build-A-Bear, bears for the bride.
People get engaged in Build-A-Bear. They ask each other to get married using the Build-A-Bear. They put their own voice in the Build-A-Bear and give the bear, and they press the paw, and they ask people to get married. Aww. We have had a marriage inside of one of our Build-A-Bear workshops. It's very, very special to people.
Oh, that's fabulous. But let's just go back to that first 100 days or so, because this is not your first rodeo. I mean, you've been involved in turnaround situations with brands before. One of the ones I thought was absolutely hilarious, which I had totally forgotten about, was Furby. And,
oh, yeah.
And Butterscotch the pony.
Yes.
So, there's a lot of people who write on the subject of power and change and what you need to do. And that first sort of 100 days or so is pretty critical. So did you have a game plan going in, or did you kind of go in with your sensors all alert and say, I'll kind of figure it out as I get there?
Well, I just wanted to say on Furby, that was not a turnaround. That was just a relaunch of one of the most popular brands ever, products ever. And Butterscotch was a part of our Fur Real Friends brand, both of those at Hasbro, that just broke every rule, every mantra, every thought process of what could be successful in the toy industry. And it was, no pun intended, a great ride.
I still love the ads. They're so
cool. That was, just marketing 101. Box checking, tugging at heartstrings, understanding that magic between moms and kids, and the connection that you make, and it was a wonderful experience. But the first 100 days at Build-A-Bear, the first thing we had to do was not fun at all, but absolutely necessary. It's a publicly traded company. We had to put together a plan to return to profitability immediately. And did I have a game plan on that? A general one. One of the reasons that I went to Build-A-Bear, though, is because it was not a lost cause.
No.
One, the brand value far outweighed the current business, what was reflected in the current business results. It also had a very clean balance sheet, great cash flow. So we had a pretty long horizon to get this together. But we did need to stabilize the stock price, and we needed to, therefore, first things first, focus on profitability before you started focusing on growth. And so once you've been in a number of turnaround situations, whether it's business units or brands, you get pretty good at knowing where the culprits usually are, which line items don't make sense. You know where to dig, poke, and then you start getting into it. And we pulled a lot of levers that I've pulled before. Margin expansion, renegotiation of contracts, classic stuff. Stopping a lot of things that we probably should not be doing that did not have an ROI, but maybe were legacy from the past. And we returned. We were able to provide a bonus that year for the first time in many years.
Talk about that. That was the drive for $1, right?
That's right. That was the drive for the dollar. The team, I don't know that the team at large had been aware that because the company had been struggling, that the board put together a plan whereby if the company made $1, that they would get some semblance of a bonus. Like they wouldn't max out, but there would be a bonus to be paid, because it was just, they wanted so much for the company to focus on returning to profitability as that first step, which it should be. And I shared that with them, and we almost made it fun, if you can. I mean, and Build-A-Bear is a place where if there's ever a company where you should have permission to be a little more playful about the way you even approach or amplify or evangelize serious things, it should be Build-A-Bear, So we put together screensavers and, like flyers.
Dollars falling out of the sky, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I did that on stage to try to get them to understand almost that how we should be able to do this. I mean, literally, I was like, all we got to do is make the $1, guys, hundreds of millions of dollars, generated of revenue at Build-A-Bear. And you just got to catch one, just one. And I'm like pulling them out of the sky, just one. And you get a bonus for the first time in multiple years. I need you to understand what you do that either creates or destroys value at this company. That's not just my job. That's not just the C-level. No one can do that by themselves or with a small team. Everyone has to understand the business we are in, how money is made, and how you play that part. So does it matter when all you need to do is make $1 that you go, oh, let's just order a whole bunch of pizzas for everybody, and then you throw half of them away? And, down into the weeds of what you actually do control. You think you don't control anything, but when, that last pack of staples is the $1, maybe you do. Mm-hmm. And they took on their own mantra internally about don't spend my last $1. Don't you? I mean, they would get over people's cubes and go, what are you doing over there?
I love that.
Are you spending our last $1?
I absolutely love that. Well, because it also it really does give people permission to do stuff at a local level, right? And, in the book we talk about office supplies, right? Well, I've got these notebooks or pads or something I'm not using. Do you need them? Kind of setting up their arrangement.
They did that on their own. They put together a supply, swap meet. So that if somebody had a whole bunch of notebooks and it makes it sound like we were in dire straits. We weren't. They, as I said, we had a really clean balance sheet and and good cash flow and a line of credit and everything else. But it was really to impress upon them that they did have power in this situation, that whether we're profitable or not does have something to do with their everyday decisions and actions. And that's an important mindset. And if you have to if you have to shift that by doing something fun or putting screensavers together, and this was someone's idea. This wasn't my idea. Let's do a, notebook swap meet. But if that does bubble up, I also wouldn't want to be the one that said, oh, that's really not going to do anything, guys. I don't understand. You got to let that roll.
Oh, yeah.
You've got to embrace that somebody was thinking about this, as if what we do and what we don't do matters, because it does.
Well, it all amplifies, and I think that's something that a lot of leaders don't spend enough time thinking about. What are those small things that accumulate to really, really big things? I was, for a variety of reasons, I was looking at Jim Collins' work on flywheels. And how the first push doesn't look like very much, and the second push doesn't look like very much. But by the time you get to the 5,000th push, the thing is now taking on a life of its own. And I think in so many ways, that's really one of the roles of leadership, which is to, get that pushing going, and then it can kind of take on its own thing.
That's right. I think it raises the consciousness of that they are a part of a bigger entity. And that they play a part in that bigger entity. And the insistence on the macro understanding of how this company makes money is important. And we had different it was a great opportunity because we actually had different mid-level, mid-management speakers educate the organization on how we import products, what the cost is, how that works, how we think about pricing, why that's important, how that impacts you, how your decisions impact that. And I think there was a greater recognition of that we're in this together.
I love that. So one of the things you did when you first came in, and this is one of my favorite phrases of all, is the stop doing stupid stuff idea.
Well, that actually was created in another circumstance at another company. But I did take it over into the Build-A-Bear situation. And I call it the SDSS times 2. And it's my 2-pronged turnaround strategy boiled down. And it is stop doing stupid stuff, followed by start doing smart stuff, in that order. And and what is remarkable to me is when you really ask people, they're like, what do you mean? I don't do anything stupid. And you're like, let's just review that. Let's think about that. Because most of the time people know what they're doing that isn't creating value. And that's really what I'm calling stupid in this particular case. Either creating value, or they're not creating value, or they're destroying value, actively destroying value. And they haven't paused to think about, how is this destroying value in the simplest and the largest ways? And at that particular company, this was when I was on Stride Right, we decided to pause because we needed to figure out where all of these less efficient choices that people were making, AKA stupid stuff, which, by the way, they didn't make up. Some manager probably told them to do this stuff. This isn't about the people doing the stuff. This is about the stuff. And that manager isn't stupid either. They probably told them to do that in a circumstance, at a time, in a situation where the stuff wasn't stupid. So, but things linger and habits happen. And every now and then you need to do an assessment of, is there any stupid stuff happening? And so again, I wanted to make this more entertaining for people. And we likened it to Groundhog Day, the movie that Bill Murray was in, where I want you to keep living this day until you figure out where you can free up time, because what you're doing is not adding benefit either to yourself or the company or the brand, right? And because if you don't do that, if you don't free up that time in a turnaround situation, you're going to have a lot of great ideas probably coming in of what the company can do. You've assessed everything, you've looked at everything, you've read everything, you've talked to everybody, you've done your cross-functional, you've done up and down. And then you're like, here's the strategy. But the strategy is going to require change and new actions. it is impossible for people to embrace or find the bandwidth for change and new actions, AKA smart stuff, until they stop doing some of the, because I'm going to tell you, all their days are completely busy from their point of view. You have to find a way to open up those gaps for them to make these changes. If you do not do that as a leader, what you're going to get is a lot of feedback from the company that we don't have time to do any of that. Then you're going to add SG&A inappropriately to start doing smart stuff, have the new people start doing smart stuff. When you have a lot of people, to use another analogy, rowing in the wrong direction. So that's why this is so critical in that order to do that. But this is the simplest example. We had lots of people, like all day, everyone in my division, we just took the day off, sort of. But what you're doing is the normal things that you do and think, is this the most efficient way to do this? Is there a better way to do this? Is this even necessary? Should I even be, who reads this report? Or is there a better way to do this report? Or I don't even know where this report goes. Like some of the stories coming out of Groundhog Day for us were absolutely, we turned it into fun. There was no judging. And my favorite, simplest story was that every day a young lady would come in, and there had been a pretty thick report that had been printed out on a printer adjacent to her cube. She had no idea where it came from, what it was for, and no one's ever asked for it. And every day she would come in, pick up that report, and throw it in the garbage.
Really?
Really. And you're like, on one side, you're like, you know what? A big, inch thick of paper every day. So what? How much can that cost? But it's not about that. It's about the mindset. And that process caused her to look and see where this was coming from, call them, ask them who they think they were sending it to, what's the purpose of it, and stop the report. Now, again, super simple, not going to change the world, but it's the shift in this. I do have control. I do have part of this responsibility. There are things that I am either doing or not doing that are destroying value or not creating value. And that's the stupid stuff. So, and we just had a lot of fun with it. And I think it changed our mindset. And we also returned Stride Right to profitability in very short order, and ended up with double-digit comp on our wholesale side, and also a 12 comp on our retail side on my last year there. And that comes with believing in people to push down knowledge and empowerment, because you cannot do it alone. Strategy is just writing on a piece of paper until people execute it. Mm-hmm. And they cannot execute it until they have time to do so and they understand what they're doing and how that ultimately ladders up to the creation of value. And that is one of your biggest jobs, to both make sure that gets cascaded in a way that people can grasp it and understand it, give them the empowering tools to be able to execute against it, and know that they're going to be, the goal is for everyone to be rewarded when that happens.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So you, clearly CEO now, but it was not always a predictable path. And if I go all the way back to, you were the first in your family to go to college, right?
4 years. Yeah, the 4-year college. Yeah.
4-year college. But you sort of started and stopped. And maybe talk about that a little, because one of the things I find is people think that they've got to get on this track, and that if they get off that track, like, it's over. And yet you were working at a gene shipping operation.
Yes,
so
I did.
About that mindset, because I think it's a fascinating mindset for people to say, just because I happen to be doing this right now does not mean that's what I have to be doing forever.
Well, yeah. And this is also, in the odds were bad for me to go back to a 4-year university after taking a break. I mean, that's just, the statistics are what the statistics are on that. But I can only speak to it as from a small town. But I think that it may bleed over into other mindsets of people who may not be on the automatic path, and that everyone around them is going to a 4-year college. it's difficult for someone to acclimate sometimes to a bigger community. My entire county had 30,000 people in it. And that was the size of the school that I went to. So it really can be hard for someone from a smaller community to navigate in that environment. Now, I was dead set on going to college. I can say that unlike a lot of folks that maybe grow up in my town or towns like it, that there isn't an automatic expectation that everyone in your senior class is going to college. They don't. They have lots of other paths, and they take those paths. So you're already like kind of out on the edge comparative to what maybe some of your friends are doing or thinking. But four of us, three of my friends that I've known since, this is just the way it works in little towns, since I was 4 or 5 years old, at least a few of them, we all went up to be suite mates, and they chose a different path, which is actually very common before we got through school. Somewhere between freshman and sophomore year, somewhere in there, every one of them chose a different path. And so here I am, and I'm like, wow, now what? I don't have my support structure. I really hadn't probably acclimated and engaged with the broader community because I had this kind of built-in friendship group. And I felt a little bit like, if this isn't for people that are like me, that I've known all my life, how can it be for me? Like, who am I to think that this is my path when it's clearly no one else's path that I know, that I know. And I decided to take a break and go home and sort of get it together, just get my head wrapped around, get my head, is this really my path? Is this what I want? Is this, and on the surface, you're like, that's okay. But it's, as I mentioned at the beginning of this segment, so many times the statistics are so overwhelming that people, once they take that break, they don't come back. But I wanted to make a little money and try to get it together, like what I wanted to do. And I did. I worked at a blue jean pick and pack facility because it pays a lot. And seriously, it's big, like think it's fulfillment is what it is. You're picking pack. I would get like paper orders of, Walmart or whoever, and you got to go pick these, roll them, pack them up, send them. And I thought it was a blast. Like I would sit and pick my orders based on, like orders, and I got really, really efficient. And there was a group of women that did not like how efficient I was, and kind of had a conversation with me about, you're throwing off the curve. That wasn't their terminology, but and I'm like, what? And again, this is not a commentary on the pick and pack industry is critical to these days, more critical than almost ever. But and there are a lot of amazing people, and we certainly we work in pick and pack. I love our folks at our warehouse, but it's more of a commentary on a mindset of, I decided right then that that's not who I am. I always want to, even in that environment, I wanted to be the best that I could be. I wanted to push the envelope on what I thought I could do. And I also wanted to be around people that wanted me to do that and that wanted to do that themselves. So that was setting a really important guardrail for me in my life on what I was going to tolerate for me and for my life. And it was that simple little situation that spurred me to say, well, that's it. Maybe I lost my way for a second here, that I didn't know who I was or what I was capable of or where my guardrails were, but I know now, and I'm never going to forget them. And I went right back to college and graduated with honors. But I do recall the day that I quit, and this actually is new information, Rita, not in the book. Somebody said to me, you'll never make more money than you make right here, right now. That's a true story.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's fabulous. I hope at some stage in your life you send them a gift box, you know?
I don't know who it was. I couldn't pick them out. I couldn't tell you who that was. Somebody kind of yelled, you'll never, and I'm like, wow. I don't know.
I wonder how much of human history is driven by the very human desire to show people up that talk like that.
If you can package it for yourself in the right way, it's fine. As long as you don't turn it into hate and vitriol.
No,
that's only going to drag you down. But if you can put it as fuel, use it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So then you went into advertising.
Yes. Yes.
And ended up not working in New York at first, right?
No, that's right. I wanted to make a little money and to be able to afford some, an apartment, a place to live.
Dream big.
So I worked at a local Knoxville because I went to school at the University of Tennessee, a local agency. I learned a lot because in the smaller company, you're not pigeonholed. You really just wear every hat the owner throws at you. You put this on, put this hat on, put this on, try this. So I was constantly in sort of situations that you just have to be clever. It's not about or tenacious, or maybe some combination of both. He would ask me to do things that the reason it would come to me, basically, by the time he figured out who I was because nobody else had figured it out. And I learned that being that person was also a good person to be. When, because you would hear him like down the hall, it would be like, Sharon, and it would be like, go, I don't know, they can't figure this one out. Go figure it out. And I'm like, okay, no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think jobs like that when you're young are just so valuable. I mean, one of my first major full-time jobs was with the city of New York, and it was a similar situation. It was like, if you're the one who can figure it out, you become the go-to person, and they're just like, here, have it.
Yeah.
No politics, no power struggle. Just if you can make this happen, we're fine.
Oh yeah, it would be ranging from anything from figure out who we should call to get a pitch on this thing, and I just call people until I got through. Or we're going to have this big event here. You plan it for us. I'm like, all right, I can plan an event. Absolutely. No problem. Mm-hmm. Or I remember one, he's like, we have a grand opening at one of our clients. And, I was just thinking, I want dollar bills all stapled together. Like they might take 100, 200 of them. I don't know. You go figure it out. That we got just a few hours. I'm like, got it. Oh, and then I'm walking out the room and he's like, and a really big pair of scissors.
I love it.
But
eventually you did decide to tackle the Big Apple, and it'd be fun for people to hear how you did that, because it was, let's just say, a little unconventional.
Well, I didn't know it was unconventional, which is kind of fun, right? There's a whole theme that I have that sometimes you just do so much better when you don't know any better, because you're not calculating the odds, you're not overwhelmed by the fear. You're just jumping in because you really don't know exactly what you're doing. And the particular gentleman that owned this agency in Knoxville had gone to work in New York and then came back and started this. So I was so fortunate to hear his stories and his lore, and I became enamored. And there was also this to tie this together, that realization of I want to be around people that want me to do the best I can do, that want me to be the best, and to be surrounded by people who also want to achieve those types of goals for themselves. That permeated in me, and I created this value structure. I even wrote them down. It was a mnemonic based on my price values to be true. So I had perseverance as my P, and I'm like, I'm going to New York, right? I'm going to figure this out, because all of that path had made these for my values. So you always start leaning into these things that you believe about yourself. And it also cuts out a lot of trepidation and a lot of rumination, because you're like, this is who I am, therefore I do this. And you have to make sure that you're choosing really great sort of I get, again, empowering values on the, this is who I am. So again, then you don't waste time on the churn. So I'm like, if I'm going to be the best I can be in advertising, where else would I go? It wasn't, I want to go to New York. It was that this is who I am. This is what I must do. Mm-hmm. So I put together this, I look back on it now, it's hilarious. And you clearly find humor in it as well, Rita, which is perfectly fine. I thought that it would be fine if I could take 1 week off of my job, and I should be able to get like 3 interviews a day. Manhattan's small. How hard can that be to get from all? It'll be great. And I really knew no one. So I got what you remember the Red Book? It was this big book in advertising where everybody's named all the top 10 agencies, all the top agencies, and I wanted to be one of the top 10. So I went down through them. I would just like read, and the names are tiny, tiny little print. And I would find a name that I thought, oh, they look nice. That looks like a nice person. And they had their phone number right there. And I would just call this person, and early in the morning, because I'm trying to avoid the assistant or the secretary at the time. And I would get these people on the phone and just start. I had a script. And I think that I learned some of this from that advertising experience, right? Where the CEO, the boss, the owner would just say, go figure this out, right? And I'd be like, I'm getting through. He wants this answer. He wants this person. He wants this contact. And I would figure this out. I ended up getting my 15 interviews, 3 interviews a day. Well, they're really just meetings. Some of them were interviews. Some of them were coffee meetings. Some of them, just a big collage of engagement moments to learn about what I could do. And I'm like, oh, here I go. And believe it or not, I got another interview, the 16th interview. They called me back. It was DDB Needham, which of course is a renowned top 10 agency, global agency, and for an opportunity to interview for the account executive trainee program, assistant account executive trainee program. Look, I now know, I don't believe they have it anymore, but at the time in the 90s, that was a big deal. This was a bit of a well-known thing that I didn't know was a well-known thing. Thank God, because I would have been so nervous. I wouldn't have probably done very well at the interview. But, went in, had the interview, and she said, right, and we have all your information. So good to talk to you. We'll get back to you in a week or so. But I had created this vision in my mind of what was going to happen during this week in New York. My goal was to have a job in 1 week through this process. That was my goal. And I had gone through this envisioning process of how I was going to do that. And that was like, it was almost like one of those cartoons where it automatically goes, it runs off the road. And I'm like, to this day, I cannot tell you what synapses were firing for me to lean in to her in that almost in a split second, but it must have spun in my head. It felt like, a long pause for me to say, no, why can't you just make me the offer right now? And she's like, well, I've already let my apartment go. I'm coming to New York and this is where I want to work. How bad can this be? And she said, okay, fine. The starting salary's $24,000 a year. And Rita, then I really think I ran into a ditch, but I said, I'll take 25.
I love that story.
And but then I backed it up, right? With, I've already been working for a year. Everyone else is a true trainee right out of college. I think that's fair. And I don't know where that sort of gumption came from in that moment, because it was a split second decision. But it goes back to your kind of one of our opening discussions. I think I kind of automatically went through what's the worst thing that can happen. Mm-hmm. It was just this filter of, if I push on this, what's the worst thing that can happen? Mm-hmm. And in that moment, because it was a moderate increase, and I gave her a reason why. It wasn't just a demand just because.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, well, the worst thing that can happen is she just says, no, 24, that's our standard. And that's a take it or leave it. Then of course I would have taken it.
Mm-hmm.
But in that moment, when I did it in a pretty calm way, it wasn't a demanding way, it wasn't in a rude way, and it was with real purpose as to why, that the justification of that. Even if she'd said no, I think I told her something about who I was,
mm-hmm.
that would probably be good for their clients and for them in advertising.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So in the book, which is not just kind of an autobiography, the book has really got, every sort of chapter has a thing you can fill out, or some things to reflect on, or some things that you found helpful in your own journey. And I just don't want our listeners to forget that. So when the book comes out, January 2023, we'll make sure to let you know, because I think there's a lot of valuable things in there, like writing down your goals, for example, and all the research that goes into people that do that are much more likely to achieve them than people that are just like, oh yeah, someday, I'm going to do whatever. And things like, what are your values? And the ones you talked about, you talked about making yourself a mnemonic. And let me just see where I've got it here. Based on your last name, which I thought was very interesting. That sort of, maybe you can remember them before I started to go find them, but perseverance and among others, and just having that as a background so that you're in tune with your values all the time.
Right. I don't even consider it an autobiography, Rita. It's just truly pulling stories that are that enable the discussion of greater constructs
mm-hmm.
that have been pivotal
uh-huh.
for me
mm-hmm.
and informative for my future.
Yeah.
And now I do pull the stories together in a chronological way so that it makes sense, because I was learning, like we all do, things at different levels as I grew older and had more experience. So you kind of have to get some of the first things first, the setting of goals, then the setting of values, and then the rethinking of your goals, because you've learned more. Mm-hmm. And if you're trapped in an old construct, maybe you're underestimating your own capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so the other thing that was really important to me is that I didn't want this book to be based on just my opinions mm-hmm. and my own reflections. So to your point, in each case where I had a self-learning, I went back and looked through the business books and psychology about what was happening to me in that moment, with the data to support why that made sense. I was just taking a journey that so many have taken before. And even though it's maybe presented in a fresh way, a lot of this is age-old wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a terrific read. I'm really enjoying it. So I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the subject of, women and family, and being one of the few, publicly traded company female CEOs. And it's almost unfair, I always think, to ask female leaders, because they don't ask men the same question, so how did you manage all those years when you were traveling? But I wondered just if you had any comments you'd like to share on that topic before we move on to other things.
Well, there is a chapter in the book about the myth of perfectionism.
Yes. Spaghetti is fine.
Right.
They will live if they get fed fish fingers. It honestly doesn't have to be just a child.
You got to figure out where to lower the bar. And to keep your family together and to keep your own sanity. And you being sane as a mom. I'm a mom of 3. Been married over 25 years now. And you being sane is a big part of keeping the family sane. And it's not that I didn't have introspection about whether I was doing the right thing or not doing the right thing. And the truth is, you're always doing a little bit of the right thing and maybe a little bit of the wrong thing. And people have asked me, about how do you do it all? And my fastest answer is
Yeah.
I don't. And
Nobody does. I mean, I think you and I have this in common, which is, so I toyed with the idea very briefly of staying home after our first was born, and had a conversation. And I gather you and your husband had a similarly candid conversation with my husband. And he looked at me and he said, no way. Like, absolutely no way. You will drive both of us completely bonkers.
oh God,
within a month.
You never told me that.
Oh yeah.
Oh, your husband is, my husband's a very wise man, but he might have had more insight than mine. Who we agreed there for a short period of time. Well, let's just try this on for size. And he finally came and said, you got to go back to work. You're going to drive us both nuts. I mean, I was refinishing the stairs, during the day. Yeah.
Well, that was my husband's prediction. He said, within a month, you're going to be like running the local PTA. And within 2 months, you're going to be doing that. And you're going to drive us all nuts.
Right. And I apparently was doing that. There were adult members of our family that were on the verge of going nuts. So, but, even with that, I mean, we are making light of it. It doesn't change that you wonder, am I doing the right thing? Am I not doing the right thing? And here's the thing. There is no right thing. There is no all women should work. There is no all women should stay at home. There is no right thing for all people. It is absolutely critical that you go through this process of what are my goals? What are my dreams? What are my values? What's the best path for my family? Not just me, not just for my children, not just for my husband. What's the best path that fulfills everyone to the greatest degree? And, the key is to find that path of authenticity for you. And the way I got so comfortable with that after a while, it's a funny story in the book, which I know, but there was a friend of mine who asked me a super pointed question. And she was a psychiatrist, believe it or not, which is hilarious to me. She's like, do you want your daughter to sacrifice her dreams for your granddaughter? I really had to think about that for me. I couldn't get it together. Like, what does she mean? What is she saying? Oh my God, I don't understand that at all. And it spun around in my head for a minute. And I was like, well, no, I wouldn't want my daughter to not do something that, that's fulfilling to her because she felt like she needed to stay home and raise my granddaughter. No, I want her to be fulfilled. That's why I'm having this problem myself. And she said, she just like looked up to me. It was so poignant. She goes, so don't model it. Mm. So whatever it is that's fulfilling you, that makes your job is to live your authentic life because you want your children to model living their authentic life, not go back to work because you want your children to model you going back to work, or stay at home with your kids because you want them to model staying at home with their kids. It's because you want to model living an authentic life.
That's great. So we've had, 2020, like you sign a book contract, life is good, the firm's on a good track, and then we have a pandemic. How did you navigate through that? Because, I think one of the interesting things that my friend Tom Kolditz, who is a military guy, he writes about is, there's peacetime leadership and there's wartime leadership. And he talks about wartime leadership is, you got to get everybody moving in the same direction really fast. And so maybe you could spend just a minute or two on that. Yeah,
that of course, this is not anywhere nearly as acute as a military situation, but in the theory of it, there are a lot of similarities. And that you have to recognize when you are in crisis management. Mm-hmm. And so many of maybe your best honed management tools need to be put aside because yes, it's okay. They'll come in handy later. I know you've spent a lot of time figuring out exactly how to do this or that or the other, and for us in our particular company, collaboration's one of our values. Like we're a very collaborative company, very creative company. But this was the recognition by myself and my leadership team that this is a crisis. And so most of the time in crisis mode, action is better than inaction. Speed is better than trepidation. And so in that, you have to be a little bit more dictatorial, and you have to get a lot of confidence and a lot of alignment very quickly. And you have to cascade at light speed. Because, we ended up shutting down 500 stores around the world in a 48-hour period, and then furloughing 90% of our organization over the next few weeks. That's not a lot of contemplation with 7 different scenarios. No.
Yeah, that must have been really tough.
Well, it takes enormous strategic trust with both you, your leadership team, and the organization. Mm-hmm. That you'll never know how critical the creation of that strategic trust is, and how strong the sinews are until you're in that crisis that I hope you're never in. But in that moment, the fact that we had created strategic trust up and down and across this organization, and that we felt as if we needed to move forward. It was such a drive to move forward with the best information, knowing it wasn't perfect. And we were clear, we were as crystal with the organization as we could be. We started having weekly sort of fireside chats where everyone would get on, and I'd be like, guys, I'm not going to pretend that I know what's next. I'm not going to pretend I know how we're going to handle this. I can't tell you this. I can't tell you that. I can't tell you that we have a guaranteed path, but I can tell you that this leadership team and we have identified a path. There is a path to the other side of this, and you're going to have to trust us. And we may make mistakes, but I'll be as honest with you as I can about the choices we're making and why we're making those choices. And our goal is the same goal that it has always been: to do the best by you, the best by our shareholders, the best by our guests, and the best by this brand. And we're going to lean into this. And at some point, there will be a pivot where our expectation is not just about survival, but about thriving. Mm-hmm. And we actually changed the name. My leadership team and we instituted meetings every single morning, including the weekends, because there was Rita, you remember, there's so much information. It was so conflicting, and it was new every day. And what to do, how to operate, how not to operate. And I changed the name of these meetings from like COVID crisis meeting to the Build a Bear Success meetings.
Love it.
And I read an article, and it was really written for the recession, but something struck me in this article about thinking about things that are really, really difficult, and just kind of mentally massaging it and fighting it and turning it in facets in your mind until you find an angle where, what would you do if this was meant for your good? What would you do if that this was setting you up for success? How would you act if you knew that was true? And again, I just want to add a little side note here. Of course, I am in no way, shape, or form implying that COVID was good. People suffered, people died. That's not what I'm saying. It really is just the mental gymnastics of, if you can address or assess anything that's happening in your life, just with that lightness of, oh, this looks like it's terrible. And just pause for a second and say, but what if it was meant for the best thing? What if it was meant to be the best thing that ever happened to me? And then you start to think about it differently. And almost by the process of thinking about it differently, you see the opportunity, you see the edge, and you get in a much better mood about it all, which somehow helps. I don't know. But then we're like, wow. And I said to them, I'm like, so, and they're like, oh, no. My team is really, really good and very forward thinking. And I was like, so think about it this way. What would we do with our time, effort, energy, and money if we had the luxury of all of our stores being shut down for a month. Because all of our energy or time is sucked into this huge, huge piece of our revenue. If something, if our stores hiccup, everybody focuses and we have to fix that immediately. And so you never get to the things that create additive value. It's really difficult. It's always second nature, second thought, right? And we had this roadmap and had already been in a long process to evolve on the digital transformation side and to find a way for Build-A-Bear, an experiential retail company, to participate in the digital economy in a much larger scale. But there's a little bit of negativity around that. How are you ever going to do that? Will it not cannibalize your stores? How do you replicate this? Isn't that the only reason somebody comes to Build-A-Bear is for the experience? Why would anybody want to buy a bear online? I mean, you could just, pretty typical stuff, and insert any company here, and we accelerated. Now it's like this terminology that I don't know came out of nowhere and everybody says it, but we literally accelerated our digital transformation at such a rate, like things that were not planned for another year, we did it in weeks and months. And now when I first arrived at Build-A-Bear, e-com was only 4%, less than 5% of our company. It's 20% of our business now. Yeah. And we triple digit our e-com that year. It was remarkable. And some of that was, again, a long road of planning prior to that, a lot of stepping stones that had been put in place, some switches that had been flipped on some final implementation of warehouse management system, buy online, ship in store, buy online, pick up in store. But the way we were able to activate what was our single standing revenue stream, which was e-com, and protect that warehouse, operate with the oversight of all the CDC recommendations, the state and local regulations in Ohio, which is where our warehouse is, assuring those teams were safe, breaking them into two different segments so we could keep operating was, I'm so proud of the organization for this. I look back on that and I'm like, you really don't want such a challenging and negative experience to be a moment of realizing what you're capable of. You wish you could get there kind of more organically. But that's kind of a theme in human nature, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Well, I don't want to overstay my welcome. How do people learn more?
Well, when the book comes out, there will be storiesinheart.com, and we do have a cover, so I can share that with you.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So the cover's complete, and it is Stories in Heart, Unlock the Power of Personal Stories to Create a Life You Love, because it's not what happens to you, it's how you think about what happens to you. And that's what informs your future mindset and therefore your life. And yeah, so it's been a great journey. It's always a pleasure speaking with you, and we will get back together.
We certainly will. So thank you so much, and enjoy your time in Nebraska. To be continued. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.